Ask maybe to restart the recording. Thank you. So good morning, everybody. Welcome to day 4 of our ENGAGER training school, the second ENGAGER training school. And today we'll be focusing our day on mainstreaming energy poverty metrics, so new metrics on also cooling part, trying to address the cooling part of the perspective of the problem. And we'll have a really interesting lineup. I'll be your host and for the day. We'll be having Professor Marta Panão from Faculty of Science of University of Lisbon, and also from University of Lisbon, Dr. Horta, and myself also giving a talk in this first round. So hopefully you are having a good week as well, and hoping for a good discussions during the day and also for tomorrow. So I'll start my giving a short presentation about the good, the bad, and the ugly from the Portuguese perspective of the problem. I would also like to say that the agenda for today will be pretty similar to the other days. Saying that for the breakout rooms, we have new questions for the session. So it's not exactly what was put on the initial agenda. That was for the hub and not exactly for the breakout room. So we have new questions trying to bring out the discussion on the groups. So I'll start sharing my screen and also. Hopefully you also recognize it from the movie I'm bringing on the title. So my name is João Pedro Gouveia. I'm a senior researcher at Nova University of Lisbon, and I coordinate the research topic in the area of research on energy poverty, energy efficiency of buildings, and the work around cities and climate change mitigation and adaptation. I'm also, since January, part of the coordination team of the Energy Poverty Advisory Hub, so the follow-up of the EPOV that a great colleague started, and will hopefully be a good follow-up of implementing. And now I'll be talking about really the problem of from my perspective at least, of energy poverty in Portugal. So looking for the good, the bad, and the ugly. So how as I see it, so it's the opposite, which I'll start with the bad and progressing. So it's a problem of metrics, as we have seen throughout the week already. It's a problem of data. So we might have the metrics, but sometimes we miss the data. And in some European locations, it's still a problem of recognition. So recognition of energy poverty as a problem. So that said, when we are looking to the energy poverty, and you know these numbers, so more or less around these figures. So when we see 50 to 125 million Europeans potentially in energy poverty, we are using proxy indicators usually to get these measures. So it seems a problem. If we are talking to policymakers, if you are talking to different stakeholders not from the area, when we say that the problem ranges from 50 to 125, there is somehow a problem of metrics. Then we also know that's driven by the European Commission as well. There is a significant amount, of course, of energy poor, and that's why the national energy and climate plans, the long-term strategies, renovation strategy of buildings, really need to set indicative objectives for the reduction of energy poverty in the member states. Then we know also that EPOV has recommended using a suite of indicators, following also the connections with the European Commission, and as we have discussed this week, a combination of different indicators to bring the different perspectives of the problem. Nevertheless, it's also identified that there is a regional specific and targeted data that is missing. So, and that EPA, the Energy Poverty Advisory Hub, will try to push forward on this perspective of the regions as well. So connecting and developing local projects, trying to connect also with the Covenant of Mayors and different municipalities at the European state level. So here I want you to bring a question as well, because we know that the data we will be collecting and usually use, it's around the EU silk, for example. Everybody around in Europe is now collecting the census data, and last week I was filling mine and I was badly surprised once again. It was not really a surprise, but it seemed a missed opportunity once again to get questions on more knowledge on how we use energy in our household. So there was no questions around heating and cooling, nothing on ownership of different types of energy equipment. So it seemed again a missed opportunity. So we'll be back in the next 10 years to see if it's improving. Then we have, and Julio presented this yesterday in the hub, but for the transport sector, we have an example of an index bringing from OpenX, bringing this multi-perspective of the problem in the housing, but it clearly shows as well that there is a measuring and monitoring energy poverty problem. So really a challenge there, because this multidimensionality of the condition, again, as I said the other day as well in the discussion, it's difficult to engage stakeholders and policymakers on using different single indicators as well. What's really the message we want to bring? Then the ugly. So the ugly, I'll focus a bit on Portugal. So the high levels of regional vulnerability, the multiple drivers and consequences that are affecting us. On that perspective, we have been trying in the last 6 years in our group to try to address this problem, researching the issue at different scales. So we developed this, probably as you know, this high resolution spatial scale index that maps all the Portuguese regions, so the 3,092 Portuguese regions, both for winter and the summer problems. So early on from our research, we identified it was really critical to bring this double perspective, as I call it here, double trouble for Portugal, into the discussion. So we have over 260 building typologies. We use real data coming from 500,000 energy performance certificates, trying to also understand how new data sets can emerge and be useful for energy poverty assessments. So here I just also want to bring the idea that Portugal is really vulnerable. So in most of all indicators commonly used, we are ranked second, third, fourth throughout the years, which is really a problem, and that's why I think this has turned out to be really a hot topic in the country, both in the media and the political agenda. So, for example, 70% of our houses have low energy efficiency. The energy prices, both electricity and gas, when we are seeing in power purchasing parity metrics, they are really high. And that gives this perspective of a range again. So on the country, we can have both. We can say, if we're looking to indicator, around 500,000 people, or it can be close to 4 million. So it gives, really show again the problem of metrics, of monitoring, and even how to connect this to policy targeting. So this is a picture more or less in all the EU countries, so European countries. That said, we have this, and this is in Portuguese because it's a headline of recent news, which clearly shows that people do not understand sometimes the numbers. There is a lack of understanding of the problem. So, and there is from the media an unconscious selection of single indicators to convey a specific message. So the two headlines there talk about the amount of money needed to tackle energy poverty, but indeed what was said from the government or what was said from the research was energy efficiency as a whole for all buildings, public administration, households. So there is sometimes a shocking understanding of the problem that immediately links everything to energy efficiency, not splitting and understanding the differences between residential and public administration and schools and so on. And again, I'm highlighting on this map Portugal because if I'm looking to the left, it seems really bad. If I'm looking to the right, it seems really good. So what's the case? So it's the need for better messaging and understanding the indicators. And then the good. So the good is not the good current situation, is the good perspectives ahead. That's what I'm wanted to talk here. So the availability of new data sets, the work we have also been doing on multiple scales of analysis, which unfolds different problems and different understandings of the issue. Participated policy, which I think is really good for the long-term strategies. Everything is being really participated with the relevant stakeholders. And then there is an increased recognition. So just to highlight here a couple of things. So we have been using energy performance certificates in our research. It's a valuable tool in the In the second day, we have a bit of discussion around the value of EPCs, but in my perspective, and what we have been doing is using the raw data coming from the EPCs. So what's really in the house is not exactly the results, because on that way, we are aware of the calculations, we are aware of how we calculate the energy needs for heating and for cooling, and we see it as a powerful tool for also assessing, and that's what we have been doing together with some other teams, understanding the impact of energy efficiency measures and the costs on the problem. Then the use of smart meters. We have also been doing that. I see it as a unique opportunity, really. So it's a matter of understanding how to bridge the gap between confidentiality, access to data, because the data exists, but it's almost impossible to get it. So we have been using that for a couple of examples to try to unfold energy poverty consumers and groups of consumers. So exploring these different dimensions of the problem. Also, we have been working around and it's important on this perspective of the summer and the winter vulnerabilities. We have been looking ahead for the future, evaluating climate change impacts, both for the country and recently with the team that we have a lot of participants, co-authors here as well, looking to the European dimension of the summer vulnerability and summer energy needs. Then on this look, we have also addressing multiple scales, so district scale analysis with this recent publication, connecting positive energy districts and their role potentially, because it's also being something really discussed in Europe, as a potential for energy poverty mitigation. Then the regional support, the capacity building component of research as well. So we are trying to bring this knowledge to the regional and the different cities and regions, as I was saying, trying to understand what might be the metrics, what might be the regional vulnerabilities of different areas in Portugal. And then the good perspective of participative policies. So this is an example of the carbon neutrality roadmap back in 2017 and 18. A lot of stakeholders were engaged. The final version includes 3 references to energy poverty mitigation. From my knowledge, that's the first piece of policy or strategy that in Portugal that highlights energy poverty. After that, we have seen examples on the national energy and climate plans, which had a problem at the time. But now, and using this table, for example, from EPO, from Marriott and team that have done this consolidation, we see the different and NECPs and what's happening there. We see a lot of differences, but hopefully, and as it's happening in Portugal, the energy poverty strategy launched last month for discussion already brings these definitions and targetings and measures. So we are improving, and hopefully all other countries will follow the same path. Just to conclude, the part of raising awareness, it's really a problem. It's really important to bring this problem recognition, because this is an important driver for change and policy measures. So through our work, and not only, we have been able to bring this topic to the media attention and the general public. And here I only highlighted a couple of things on the cover pages. So as you can see, the messaging have been like the place where thermal comfort in the winter is lower, so specific news there. 2 million shiver with cold inside their households, dwellings very vulnerable both in winter and summer. So we were able to put this both vulnerability in the news. Then Portugal does not know the number of persons in energy poverty. In a Finnish journal, which was pretty fun, only some Europeans, not fun because of the problem, but was fun to translate the research and the problem into other countries, which usually don't recognize this. So only some Europeans can afford to heat their houses, not have. And then our work for the district of Alfama in Lisbon with the numbers for energy efficiency. So I'm concluding here my presentation, and now I'm moving to Dr. Ana Horta to talk about complexity and uncertainty in household conditions, household cooling practices. Go ahead, Ana. Thank you. I'll stop sharing.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. And thank you, João Pedro, for your great introduction to energy poverty in Portugal. So you can see my presentation now. Well, I would also focus on energy poverty in Portugal based on the research we have been conducting at my institute. And I think it's interesting to start by questioning our concept, our notion of thermal comfort. What do we mean by that? And what conceptualizations and what theories are we using when we discuss thermal comfort? And I would like to highlight two different views. One is the view that informs regulations and codes and is based on technical standards, based on physiological research. And this view provides precise specifications of optimal conditions. And usually this means that these optimal conditions are not the conditions that we find naturally in the variation of the weather. Sorry. And these models are necessarily very abstract because they gather thousands of data from many different cases. So they actually ignore the real circumstances of how people experience comfort. And usually these technical standards tend to require mechanical heating and cooling processes. For example, if we take into account the baseline temperatures used by the environment, the European Environment Agency, the heating, the temperatures of heating degree days are 15.5 and the cooling degree days are 22 degrees. So comfort should be between these very short range of temperatures. So, and of course, the weather variations provide us very different temperatures across the year. So it is interesting to also take into account a different view on thermal comfort. And this view is usually used in sociological research and is focused on the social construction, the process of social construction of what people consider to be a comfortable temperature. And in this view, there are many different meanings of thermal comfort. And these meanings vary considerably throughout history, throughout different cultures and geographies, etc. And these meanings reflect different expectations of people, different cultural conventions. And this gives us a very varied scenery of what can be considered thermal comfort, because people in different contexts may feel comfortable even if the temperatures are very low or very high. But one very important aspect in this social construction view is that these meanings can evolve and change across time and across context. This is a very important aspect. So here we have some examples of how traditionally practices may have been influenced by thermal variation, and how people have adapted to warm temperatures. For example, by going on evening strolls to benefit from the cool temperatures in the evening, or the famous example of the siesta, that is a nap after lunch. There are many other practices related to cooking. For example, the use of spicy foods is also a form of adapting to these warm temperatures, or cold dishes, or clothing. Clothing is a very important way. There are also seasonal ways of life. This is more clear in rural environments, where even sometimes people migrate to cooler or warmer areas, etc. Here, this is just some examples of places and of buildings and how they have adapted to the climate. For example, in the bottom right, you can see an example of a typical house in the south of Portugal with very small windows and few windows also, and the walls painted in white to make the house cooler. But the construction of thermal comfort also changes and can change very quickly. For example, let's take into account the diffusion of air conditioning in the United States. In the beginning of the last century, it was thought that fresh air was essential for the development of healthy bodies and minds. So it was good, for example, for children to be outdoors. But from the mid of the century, installing air conditioning became an opportunity for cheap and thermally inferior construction techniques. So the houses had air conditioning systems installed, but then the building techniques were cheaper. So air conditioning became a standard feature of a normal house. By 1997, 93% of southern households had air conditioning. So it's important to take into account that, as Elizabeth Shove has said, the need for air conditioning should be seen as the outcome of a sequence of events through which a particular model of comfort is reified, naturalized, and reproduced. I would bring some results from this project, Ligar, which was conducted here in Portugal, and João Pedro and also Pedro Palma also participated in this project. In fact, the selection of the 10 locations where we conducted interviews was took into account the index of energy vulnerability to energy poverty developed by João Pedro and Pedro Palma. And in these interviews, we asked all the participants, 100 households, how did they consider the temperature of their home in the summer. And we found that for around one third, it was okay. It was a mild temperature. For around another third, it was hot, which is clearly unpleasant. But for around another third, 30% of them, it was warm. And at the time, we thought that answer was clear to us, but later looking at these results, what does this really mean, this warm? Is this unpleasantly warm? Is this acceptable warm? So the way people consider the temperatures can be well, difficult to interpret. And also we found that there is variation within the household, taking into account gender, age, health conditions, but also different understandings of people that are part of that household. There is also variation within the home. For example, upper homes with an upper floor, that floor is usually warmer than the rest of the house. And some rooms, usually rooms with larger windows with direct sun exposure, are also warmer than the rest of the house. So unless the house is very small and has only one temperature, this can vary too. And there is also variation between individuals. We found some interviewees that said that they are always hot, or that they are always cold. So, and this also should be considered. We found several ways of regulating body temperature. Clothing was the most important. Also the use of fans, although the use of fans tends to be very limited, not just because of the cost of electricity, because very often people dislike or do not believe that is really effective. But there are many other practices like taking more showers with colder water, contact with water, for example, watering plants, doing other things with water, drinking more water, move within the home to cooler rooms, staying outside, or go to cool places, even outside the city or the place where they live. And also an important result was how people regulate the temperature in their home. We noticed that there is a wide practical knowledge about what to do this. Especially through ventilation, the use of windows and doors opening or closing, and also through the times of the day, opening windows when the air is cooler and then closing when it's too hot outside, and also blocking sunlight. These windows are very common in Portugal. Almost every building has these windows, and they are very helpful in blocking sunlight, but also letting fresh air get in. There was very few households with air conditioning, but air conditioning was like fans, very seldom used, especially due to price. And there are also some aspects we would like to, we found that seem important to take into account. There are signs of changing conventions about cools. Cool temperatures used to be and are still considered a luxury for most people, but they also seem to be considered increasingly considered as normal, especially since it is becoming more and more common to find places with air conditioning, places in shopping centers, in workplaces, in cars, for example. So the acceptance of air conditioning is becoming more and more normal. So our practices in Portugal may change regarding the use of air conditioning in the near future. There are still concerns about energy cost, and those concerns are very important. But this may also change in the future, or in the case of an increasing adoption of air conditioning, this may lead to a problem of people turning on their air conditioning only during heat waves, and that may lead to peak demand, which is a serious problem. There is also an important factor that is the dislike or even fear of air currents. Many people do not like that feeling or are afraid of getting a cold or have certain health conditions that make them be afraid of that. There is also an important aspect that is the concerns about safety, noise, and insects or animals coming inside the home when people open windows or doors to let cool air get inside. Many people in our interviews, we found that many people have noise outside their homes, especially at night. They are also afraid of, if they leave a window open, someone can come in, or also insects. And that may lead them to use fans or air conditioning to cool down. There is also a low awareness of the relevance of wall and roof insulation for cooling the homes. Concerns about climate change and heat waves are should also be taken into consideration, because they may lead people to increasingly adopt air conditioning, for example. And there is also another aspect, the urban heat island effects that are important and diminish the quality of life of people living in cities. But there is an increasing awareness of mayors about those effects, and across the country we can see mayors adopting some measures to fight that by creating new green areas and planting trees, for example. And I would like to finish with this excellent diagram by Harriet Thompson and colleagues. It's uncomfortable to speak about other people's work when they are in the room, but this is a really excellent synthesis of factors that affect the vulnerability to excessive indoor heat. They suggest that there are these three factors that are very important: the risk of exposure to heat, for example, through the amount of sunlight exposure, the capacity of ventilation, or the capacity of building to absorb heat. And here, I think the size and orientation of windows, etc., this can be very useful indicators when we try to measure the vulnerability to heat. There is also a second factor, that is the capacity to adapt. There are here some aspects I did not mention based on the results of our study, like the size of the home or tenancy relations, but should also be considered. And finally, a third factor is the sensitivity of individuals to harmful consequences of heat, like age and health conditions. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Anna.
And
great insights. Now we can move to Marta. So Marta will be talking about the future energy consumption of national building stock, so more than physics. Go ahead, Marta. You are muted. think you should try to stop sharing and then unmute
Okay,
yourself.
okay,
And then, okay, perfect.
Thank you. This is a problem of Max, that we cannot see all the commands all the time. Okay. Hello, I am a professor at the University of Lisbon in the Faculty of Sciences. And my topic here is kind of marginal to the topic of energy poverty, because it's about estimating the future energy consumption of building stock. And my research area is like in energy and buildings. And I started to think more about energy poverty when I worked with building stock models, and I found huge differences between what the models say that we should consume and the real numbers of the statistics that about the consumption in buildings. Here I have just this question: how to quantify the impact of energy poverty policies when we want to improve, for example, buildings, and when we want to spend a lot of money on buildings, how to calculate this impact when we want a number of to estimate future energy consumption. Of course, more related to heating and cooling, because it's all about that when we think about energy poverty, even if there is the transportation that we talked about yesterday. This performance gap that we have, probably in some countries, the performance gap is higher than the others. At least in the countries from the south, this performance gap could be very, very large for heating and for cooling. And when I started to think the causes, probably the main cause is when we are trying to model what are the end users' preferences and priorities and the constraints they have for the energy consumption. Probably we are very far away from the reality. And of course, there are other issues that we should take into account when we want to model the building stock. One very interesting topic is to find the representative buildings. What if we are not able to model all the building stock? We should try to find representative buildings. But the question is, how are they representative of the reality? And there are here two approaches, two main approaches. One is to get a sample. That means, for example, taking EPC certificates that is a sample of all the building stock. And also another approach is to find archetypes. It means like a theoretical building that represents a group of buildings. Of course, my background is physics, and I also think about the physics of how to model the energy balance and to find the heating and cooling energy demand. And of course, there are complexity models that are more complex than others, and also a lot of uncertainty in different parameters. And of course, when we are trying to compare the real results, the statistical values, we should take into account how we are modeling the climate. For example, there are models that take into account only the degree days. Other models take into account typical years. And of course, this is an issue that we should consider. Another issue is have the data to compare or to make our models more accurate. And one big problem is end use disaggregation, because we know, for example, we can know the electricity consumption, but we cannot know, for example, the heating, the electric heating that we are spending on, for example, for heating or for cooling. I pick here the example of cooling. If we want to estimate the future energy consumption, we have a lot of questions. Probably some of them are very easy to try to answer. For example, which houses have an air conditioning could be easy to know this number, but what is the preferred set point that people use is a very difficult task to know. I will go forward because we are running the time. I have here 3 examples of questions that those papers are not research from that I did, but are examples of alerts that we should have in consideration when we are trying to model the energy consumption. In this paper, for example, the authors find that they try to understand when the people switch on the air conditioning. And for example, in the left side image, we have that people switch on the air conditioning when the indoor temperature goes higher than 29 or 30 or 31 degrees. And this temperature is much higher than when we model, when we usually pick the number from standards and that say, for example, that the comfort starts at 26 or 27 degrees. And also the set point, it's a different temperature because the first one is when people really switch on the air conditioning, and the other one is the set point they put to have the air conditioner. Other work is about uncertainty of the parameters that are the inputs to describe the buildings. And usually very simple models, we use fixed values for example, to describe windows or the insulation of the walls or the roof. But for when we are evaluating a lot of buildings, there are a lot of uncertainty of these values. And therefore, in this paper, the author explored, for example, modeling with distributions and not with fixed values. And this is an idea to implement a stochastic approach of modeling for the future models. Another one is about the use of archetypes. Usually the common approach is to define single family houses by year of construction, and apartments and is a very fixed idea of archetypes. And in this paper, the authors explored, for example, using grouping techniques, but with a specific goal. For example, we want to find the most representative buildings to describe to describe heating. But authors say at the end of the paper that this should be then the same for cooling, because probably the archetypes will be different for cooling than for heating. For example, if we think of a building in the summer, the most important parameters could be, for example, solar exposure, and not, for example, the volume of the building, which could not be so a relevant parameter. Finally, about complexity of buildings. We are now using 3D building thermal advanced models to make the calculations, and probably we are increasing on the number of inputs and uncertainty and also computation time. And from my point of view, we should think about a correct balance of using models. For example, very easy models that use heating degree days and cooling degree days are not complex, and they require a few parameters, but probably they are not a right approach, for example, to handle the intermittent heating and cooling, as is a common use on countries from the south of Europe. And of course, we can discuss how far we should go on complexity of using models to compute all this energy. And finally, I will leave with some keywords that are inspiring my research on these building stock energy models. One is clustering, is understanding more on representative buildings. And the other one is what are the parameters that are relevant for estimating consumption. Another one is stochastic, use the stochastic approach to model, to handle with this uncertainty on the building side and also on the user behaviors. And there are some papers that also use the strategy of clustering to model the behavior of the people. And the other word is interdisciplinary, because I think that these models are more than physics, because we have to work with social sciences to understand more the behavior of the people, and also the statistical sciences to make more robust models. And thank you. I have here some other, these are papers from that of my research on building stock. And that's all, João.
Thank you, Marta. Really great. So now we are entering the discussion phase. I'm buying a bit of time, or I'm stealing a bit of time to the chit chat. So I'm advancing on that and going to the discussion now. I see a couple of questions on the chat, but maybe we can go first for some in-person or at least voice questions, and then if there is time, I can reply to those, or I can just reply on the chat. So if someone have any question for me, Anna, or Marta. Okay, so maybe I can pick one of the questions. So from Caitlin, thank you, Caitlin, about this question of multiple scales of analysis. So what we understood really, and from early on when we developed the index for assessing all Portuguese regions, was a matter of trying to bring together data that was available for the whole country. So not only focusing on a specific region, giving insights for a city, for example, but something that would structurally allow us to do a comprehensive country analysis to fit in policy. So that was our main view, because it was clearly under research in Portugal. There was no policies and nobody was researching this topic. So it was the matter of giving some perspective that allowed us to assess all the countries. So giving both at the same time insights for the region, but also for the country, or for different NUTS levels, or civil parish or municipality. That said, we understood also that it was not enough. So we needed to dig deeper because of the part of identification of households, for example, trying to look, zoom in on specific regions to get more details, to connect with interviews, for example, which is not feasible at the national scale, of course. So we are still struggling with identifying what's the best scale. That's why, for example, Pedro's PhD thesis is around the scales and metrics of at different levels, really trying to understand, because I see it as multiple scales are relevant for different types of views and metrics and assessments. So we are keeping all the scales, let's say, from the buildings to the country. Hopefully I could answer your question. Catherine, thank you.
Yeah, thank you everyone for the interesting presentations. I just wanted to ask Anna, with regard to the Ligar project, and I know that you have worked closely with João and Pedro and with the index and And I wondered if you found in your interviews a kind of overlap in the people who said that they were experiencing more thermal discomfort and the areas that were identified as more vulnerable on the index. And I just wondered if there was any overlap or if it varied just more widely than that. Thank you.
Hi, Catherine. Thank you for your question. It is a very interesting question. However, that was not all the 10 locations we chose were locations with that were considered hotspots according to the hotspots of vulnerability to energy poverty according to the index. So all those locations were already places where we were expecting to find people vulnerable to energy poverty. But that would be very interesting to do in another research, in future research, maybe to have locations where the vulnerability is to energy poverty is expected to be lower, and interviews in locations where that vulnerability should be higher. That would be very interesting. As we have done, there was no, all those locations had a high level of vulnerability. We also tried to, well, but I don't want to take too much time, but we also tried to make interviews to choose locations with different climates, etc., to cover many different situations. But that would be for a future research.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Pedro?
Good morning. I have a question for Anna, but I think maybe the three speakers will have something to say about it. When talking about buildings energy policy, some researchers highlight the need to focus on buildings energy sufficiency and not just on buildings energy efficiency. So shifting the focus from energy to comfort. And as Anna was mentioning, comfort is a biological phenomenon, but also a social construct. And there's two different approaches to measuring. Maybe there's the physical models with metabolic rate, and also you have the surveys to capture the perceived experience of the people. So I was wondering, how can we decrease the subjectivity of analysis in thermal comfort if we are to make thermal comfort the main focus in buildings energy policy? Do you favor one of these methods? Do you think they should be combined? And also, there seems to be like a one measure fits all in this policy schemes, like one temperature for for all the population. Do you think these assessments should be maybe disaggregated by region, by typology, by building typology, by type of social group? This is my question.
Well, thank you. That is a really huge question.
Sorry.
Well, I think subjectivity exists, and we will never, and we should embrace it. We should embrace it because we can see that there is a very big variability considering different countries, different cultures, different contexts, and also within the same household. Different people have different perspectives, different feelings. When even brothers can have brothers have the same education background, etc., but they can have different feelings, different perceptions of thermal comfort. So I think we should embrace thermal variability, the variability and the subjectivity of thermal comfort, but that is a very big challenge to the need of setting regulations and codes that the objective is to make them universal, right? that universalization and standardization of those regulations brings problems to people that have very different perspectives. We have seen in the literature that people can find themselves comfortable in very extreme temperatures, ranging from 6 degrees, I think, to 30. So the variability is very big, and we should embrace that, I think. How else then can we consider that some people are below the level of comfort? Maybe we should ask different questions. For example, maybe this is just a question. Should we try to focus on thermal comfort, or should we try to focus on other aspects of energy poverty? For example, should we focus on the capacities, the capabilities of people to have access to what they consider to be comfortable? Maybe that would be a different way of focusing. For example, if for that person, that household, is the only way of feeling comfortable in the summer is by having air conditioning because they feel they need that cool. Maybe then if they cannot afford that, they are in energy poverty. But for another household who has air conditioning but they don't use it, because they feel okay by just controlling the windows, etc. Then we should not consider them in energy poverty if they don't want to turn on those equipments.
Thank you, Anna.
Embrace diversity. That's
Thank you.
my suggestion.
Before we stop here this discussion and start the other one, I'm just sharing 2 photos I've luckily found last week online. So on the left, you can see really an interesting strategy for cooling your house. So one equipment for 2 rooms in the house. And on the right, you cannot, but maybe half of the people can understand the Brazilian Portuguese on the right. It's asking if the client is asking, well, this air conditioning is not cooling my house. And the technician asks, but it's turned on. Well, it's cooling the outside. So maybe it's a really nice cooling strategy here on the right. So both inside and outside, you can see on the wall here. So this is kind of sets the scene also for the breakout rooms in our discussions. Maybe I think we can have like four minutes of a kind of a break, and we'll come back. So these are the 4 topics we want you for the teams to address in the breakout rooms. So the breakout rooms will be random, so we'll not follow the hub structure groups. Just to mix a bit the thoughts, and because some of you have already thinking on more specifically, so the hub people, our hub, have been focusing a bit on summer energy poverty. I'd like a mix on this. So we'll bring this some, I would say, some interesting topics and dual perspectives on these problems, on how to integrate energy poverty strategies and cooling strategies into plans, into long-term visions, understanding what can be, as Anna was also unfolding a bit, what can be sustainable strategies as well. So group 1, and I'll put this on the chat as well for you to see, but I wanted not only to bring, we wanted not only to bring an highlight of the, let's say, the main question, but also a bit of background to be easier for you to discuss in the groups. But the first one, it's around the sustainability of energy consumption reduction measures. So in Southern European contexts, with high energy performance gaps and underconsumption practices. So we have seen, Marta has also shown on her presentation. So it's a bit of discussing the contradiction between promoting and looking to the future and the increased ownership of air conditioning. For example, just as a benchmark, Portugal. So Cyprus is one of the European countries, for example, with the highest ownership of air conditioning, while in a similar climate, Portugal is one of the lowest probably. So in between we have Spain, Italy, and other countries of Southern Europe. So it's a bit of understanding the parts of energy needs reduction, so the insulation measures, windows, and then maybe the equipment side. On group 2, we also want to discuss this part of the cost-effective approach as usually unfolded by the models used for long-term energy and climate strategies. So how do you see heat pumps replacing, for example, more traditional equipment, or the reduced use of traditional construction practices? So what's the real feasibility of these new equipments to integrate energy poor households? So what are the barriers, advantages, and the impacts? Then group 3 on climate change and space cooling. So looking to the future, we know that most, or if not all, the NECPs, the long-term renovation strategies, the energy poverty strategies, and the most carbon neutrality roadmaps do not consider the impact of climate change. So how do you think this can influence vulnerable consumers? Which policies are we currently or will be missing in the future or overlooking because not considering climate change? And really, how can this be integrated in national strategies and policies? Then specifically the part on how to include cooling, because we have seen during the week, I stressed this a bit as well. So the indicators either do not exist to allow to this integration, or the information is not up to date. So we have seen problems on ownership of air conditioning, the statistics are old, or the EU silk question around summer comfort in your house. So it's also not being collected in the last year. So how to bring together new data sets, new ideas for this energy poverty measurement and understanding into national policies in the future. So this is the main questions for the groups. I'll stop sharing and I'll be putting these questions on the chat for everybody. And maybe now, Marta, you can try. We'll start maybe with group 1 on the trying to get some key ideas around really the sustainability of energy consumption reduction measures. So I'm not sure who was in the group, but yeah, group 1 can start with this discussion. Thank you. We have 3-4 minutes for that.
Thank you. So we agreed that I would start talking and everyone else would jump in if they had anything to add.
Perfect.
So we started by thinking about sustainability and what sustainability meant, and about the conflicting priorities within sustainability as a concept itself, so between economic, social, and environmental. And then we moved on to thinking about how new technologies were a long-term fix or a temporary solution within the broader context of climate change. For example, implementing a lot of new technologies in areas which may not be inhabitable, like in the longer term. And then we talked about prioritizing retrofit over new equipment as a way of targeting the causes of energy poverty. And then we talked about how efficiency equipment, sometimes people can have the equipment, but they don't use it, even if they have it. And we talked about the accessibility of equipment and the way that financial aids are provided and voucher schemes, and sometimes the upfront costs are not accessible to the most vulnerable. And yeah, just about also the costs, the broader costs of retrofit, and how that significant investment is provided, and from who, and also how a lot of these like issues of more vulnerable people not being able to access support have been sort of repeated over time, and we kind of made the point that we want to move forward now from a policy perspective. And I think that was it, unless if anyone else has anything to add, that would be great.
Okay, thank you, Catherine and the group. So we can move to group 2 around this idea of a cost-effective approach, maybe not working that well on energy poor households. Let's hear from group 2 on this.
Okay.
Thank you, Roberto.
Can you see?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay. So we identify 2 main problems in this topic. On one hand, the high investment cost that is not affordable for vulnerable households, both for new technology and retrofitting. And so we are thinking about how to lower this investment cost, or to replace the investment cost, so to give them the money to actually retrofit their dwellings. And on the other hand, we thought also that, for example, for the case of the heat pumps, even if the energy efficiency is higher than, for example, a gas boiler, if we compare that in most of the country, for example, Spain, the electricity price is much higher than the natural gas one. So in terms of feasibility, if we don't introduce a social tariff, it would be not so feasible in the economic point of view. Of course, an environmental point of view is much more feasible. But the question is, does it need to be cost effective in financial terms? And so we point out the things that we don't have to integrate only the economic point of view and the environmental point of view, but we have to do a multiple benefits analysis. So to integrate externalities as the possible positive effect on health, well-being, and more aspects of everyday life of households. And then starting from that, to also think about the way to finance that on one hand, and Harriet point out how to integrate energy efficiency refurbishment with mortgages. And I don't know if you want to talk about that, especially in the case of the UK.
Yeah, certainly. So I think it originally started in Germany quite a few years ago. They have schemes for that, but in the UK, we're starting to see some of not the mainstream banks, but like specialist kind of sustainably minded building societies offer special mortgage. So I'll pop one in the chat in a minute. And basically you can say, I want to buy this house and the current EPC is whatever percentage, whatever points, and then you have to commit to upgrading it to a certain level, and then they'll give you a reduction in the interest rate for your mortgage for the remaining term, which seems, if you've got that kind of upfront capital to invest, it could be quite a good option.
Yeah, and then we also try to propose alternatives to lower this cost, or to reduce heat from industrial byproducts. Or we also point out the importance in some of the countries of district heating and cooling networks that can actually, usually in not only engineering point of view, if you supply a larger number of households, usually is most cost effective than, for example, installing a heat pump in one household. So importance of district heating, also centralized technologies. And I don't know if one of the groups can want to ask some more on the last two, so especially on the synergies. Or
I don't know, Min, I think that was your point, was it, the reusing the heat? If you want to say anything about that.
It's just the idea of cost-effective approach, not only in household term, but also in the more local community terms that could be shared. Like, for example, we can share cooling facility, for example, for a district or for a community, and also reuse heat that could be a byproduct from other industrial activities nearby. Could be a cost-effective approach, and it will be very local-based idea. So maybe have to engage local stakeholders and citizens and those people are vulnerable consumer to be creatively think about a way to have cost-effective approach. Yeah.
Thank you all. Really interesting. And again, the time to do this on the post-its. So thank you. Group 3 now on the perspectives of space cooling and climate change. What are your thoughts on this? So what are the trade-offs and looking forward? Go ahead, Adam. Thank you.
Hi, yeah. So we had quite an interesting talk about this. Joanna was talking straight away about how it's 30 already in Cyprus. And that, of course, is very subjective. So whereas she's not cold and or hot, but she's sitting there with a thick jumper on, that if someone from Northern Europe were to go over, they would probably be suffering already because of the way that we assess heat is different depending on where we come from and how we feel, and it is very much subjective. So in terms of the influence on vulnerable people, it's a bit difficult because it is so subjective. At the same time, we also discussed the fact that vulnerable people who aren't able to put in any sort of space heating and space cooling in their own homes are likely to spend more time in public places that are cooled. So we may find that it again becomes almost like a hidden aspect of energy poverty, in that we may not know that they're suffering, but they're deliberately taking countermeasures to make sure that they're kept cool by spending time in shopping malls or hopefully museums and art galleries as well. In terms of the policies, we identify that there may well be a shift away from a lot of the finances going into heating towards cooling. This is something that we'll perhaps pick up later on when we're discussing the NECPs. Of course, it does mean a different set of strategy and equipment, and we were discussing the fact that it's possible that some of the retrofitting that occurs and the energy efficiency measures may actually make summer vulnerability worse. And that even so, people are saying, high standards in buildings like Minegi and so on sound great, but even they require often some kind of heating or cooling. Even with 16 centimeter envelope around the house, it's still necessary to have some form of heating or cooling system. From an NECP perspective, there's a lot of discussion about the use of different gases and to try and make sure that any type of cooling is kept as environmentally friendly as possible to try and mitigate the effect. But there's also a very interesting paper that probably all of the authors are sitting here that has a look and discusses the fact that it's quite likely that the amount of energy requirement for cooling is going to go up 20 times between now and 2050. So it's a huge increase in energy. And no matter what we do, mitigating that is going to be a bit of a struggle. I think if there's anybody else from my group that wants to chip in, that's kind of what we covered.
Thank you, Adam, and group 3. Now moving to group 4, so the part of how to include cooling perspective into national strategies, what metrics might be available, and new data sets, interesting for fueling the discussion in the future.
Yeah, it's always tricky to capture all the interesting conversation that happens in the background in the breakout groups. But so if anybody could help me with that, I managed to capture some of the points. So we basically talked about the indicators that are mentioned in the question itself. So it's important for us to come up, or would be important to come up with relevant indicators, and also to update them, to keep them updated, which can be well achieved by of course well setting indicators, to set indicators in the way that they are actually helpful for us for the monitoring, and or to have continuous monitoring of the relevant updated indicators. And also, if we're talking about inquiries, for example, we can focus on subjects such as the buildings overheating problems. So if so we will be able to identify the overheating, the buildings with overheating problems, and if more importantly, if the users have actual access to the cooling mechanisms to deal with that issue, right? Which can also be applied to the opposite season, the winter time. And also, as Adam was just mentioning, a sort of behavioral monitoring, so we can indirectly identify issues if people are when people are using public spaces for compensate for the houses overheating issues and that sort of things. Yeah, that's just part of the conversation that happened in the breakout group, but I'm not sure if any of the other guys want to add something.
Well, I can maybe expand a bit on what we talked about regarding heat waves specifically as relatively short occurrences. So we talked about the possibility of some sort of mobilization ahead of the heat wave, which could be integrated in the planning. So mobilization on the health practitioner side and public spaces side. So perhaps to plan for some spaces, public spaces where people could spend some time temporarily, as they currently sometimes do in public libraries and similar spaces. And also on the medical side, so perhaps to hand out water and just to warn the medical system to be more responsive on consequences of heat waves.
Perfect, thank you. So maybe if there is any question or some additional comment from the other groups on any other of the points, or we can go for a break, 12-minute break. Yeah. Okay, so we can stop recording. I'll come back. Maybe we can wait 1 more minute. I think we have our hub group here: Ricardo, Irene, Adam, and Lydia. So maybe you can start sharing your PowerPoint and then go forward with the presentation.
Okay, then I'll start. Thank you, Lydia, for sharing the slides. Okay, then that was us on the previous slide. We will try to answer the following questions. How are the different national energy and climate plans dealing with energy poverty mitigation? Is there any reference to summer vulnerability? And what are the plans critically missing? So what we have done is we have reviewed the NECPs and some related literature, and also the analysis done by the EPOF that João also shared in his presentation early this morning. And we have tried to capture some main general issues. First of all, and based on all these documents, I think it's interesting to see which countries do actually recognize energy poverty as a phenomenon and which countries provide the definition of it. We can see that 8 countries out of the 27 consulted do not recognize energy poverty, and 19 do not provide in the plan a clear definition of it. And then as far as indicators are concerned, 14 out of 27 countries report indicators. Thus, these indicators are very diverse, and but most of the combination are based on the EPOV recommendations. So the high energy burdens, the low absolute energy expenditure, arrears on utility bills, and the self-reported inability to keep the home adequately warm are used, for example, in some of the countries like Denmark, Czech Republic, Romania, or in Spain. So you can move to, thank you, Lydia. So we do know, because we try to contribute to it, that there is a significant body of knowledge now on the lived experience of energy poverty, in detections, implications, like new measurements or composite indexes, and different multidimensional approaches. But as a general reflection, we'd say like the NECPs at some point fail to capture all this generated knowledge, and they turn to be an instrument that can even be very generalist. So they don't even capture sometimes some measures or policies that are actually developed at the municipal or regional level and that may be of interest. And on the other hand, they are usually, we would say, like vague, and they are very open to interpretations, because at some points they are also the result of member countries trying like to meet the targets. So there are some information that we found like open to interpretation and very diverse. All the NECPs offer very different visions of energy poverty, and we tried in terms of how do member countries conceptualize energy poverty as a phenomenon. We like made kind of a 3 group of countries, like one of them that denies the phenomenon as something being existing in their countries. We'd say, like, for example, the group led by Sweden that doesn't even recognize energy poverty to be an important issue for national energy and climate plans. But there are also like another group of countries that do recognize the phenomenon, but they don't present measures or objectives to mitigate it. They say that they will develop them. And there's like a final other group of countries that in this map that we have done with the EPOV assessment, there's like the darker ones that would recognize the phenomenon, and they also provide like measures and indicators to target it and to try to mitigate it. So, Roberto?
So what we did was try to we went through all the national plans and tried to understand how they are dealing with the question regarding energy poverty mitigation. And we saw, as Irene was saying, different approaches to it. So in green you have in the second row you see the ones that address, for instance, quantification of energy poverty in the national plans. In the third row you can see the ones that stress and define objectives and targets for 2030. And you can see plenty of differences between them. For instance, you can see countries like Croatia, for instance, that quantify energy poverty, but doesn't quantify energy poverty, but they have some type of targets regarding the future. You can see Croatia, then it tries to quantify energy poverty, but doesn't have objectives set for the future. And you have examples like Spain or France that have fully developed strategies and well-defined targets for the future. And on top of that, we try to understand a little bit the approach that was taken regarding measures for each country. So we divided in if you want, three type of measures. So countries can tackle energy poverty mitigation throughout an integrated approach, as you can see in the last row, an integrated approach, a social approach if you want, or not considering at all any type of measures like Hungary and the Poland, for instance. If you can see the next slide, please. Yeah. So just for giving an example, what it's considered to be integrated and social and not having any type of measures associated with it. For instance, you can see that, and this is just some examples. We actually did a detailed analysis of it, but when we speak in integrated approach, we meant that they are a combination of measures that normally combine social support mechanisms and the need for investing in physical infrastructure, for instance, in the improvement of the housing stock. In opposite, you have like social driven policies that are normally associated with a low or no recognition of energy poverty and saying, okay, we are just dealing with this problem through the social perspective. And then you have like Hungary, that there is no definition of measures. There is a low recognition of energy poverty, and they say that, for instance, that the fact that they are a utility cost reduction will solve the problem of energy poverty. So next slide, please.
Yeah, so we have a number of studies that have already projected that climate warming events and heat waves are expected to increase both in frequency and intensity, and this will lead to potentially severe health impacts on urban dwellers, which is also exacerbated by urban heat island effect. So there is also a study that shows that there's a potential for space cooling to increase 20-fold by 2050. So huge rise in the demand. Lots of headlines out there about excess summer deaths and so on. I'd like to draw your attention to the map that we've put in there, which shows the standardized daily death frequencies for 2003 between the 3rd and the 16th of August in 16 different countries in Europe. The most lethal day, the 12th of August, saw a mortality peak which was 5 times greater than the normal in Ile-de-France. So it can be quite an acute problem rather than it being a chronic problem. Having said that, I think it's also really important to point out that even in the terrible heat wave in 2003, there were excess of 70,000 deaths reported because of the heat wave. But this really doesn't compare when we look at winter deaths, where the figure for the winter of 2002-2003 is over 2 million excess winter deaths. Nevertheless, because of climate change, it's likely that this may be a problem that is exacerbated and grows larger. Lots of different drivers for it, of course. The population that is most vulnerable tends to be very similar to the population that's most vulnerable to winter energy poverty as well. And of course, income, age, energy efficiency of the home also have a part to play in it. When we look at age of the building itself, it's not a simple diagram where we say, well, old buildings are terrible, new ones are much more efficient. If we look at the case of Spain, for example, buildings that were produced before 1940 actually have relatively decent masonry walls that are thick enough to provide high thermal inertia. And it's only really the period under the fascist regime going up all the way through to 1979, which is when a technical code was introduced, that terrible housing exists in Spain. So that the poor housing corresponds with that period from 1940 to 1979 in Spain. I'm not saying that in 1979 suddenly everything got better, but because of the introduction of building regulations, it did improve somewhat. How can we actually reduce summer vulnerability? So if we move on to the next slide, there's a number of different things that can be done, and district cooling is certainly something that comes up an awful lot, as well as making sure that new buildings are highly energy efficient. As I mentioned earlier on in the little talk after the breakout room, the use of passive house or near zero energy buildings is great, but it still doesn't mean that we won't have a requirement for some form of cooling. Retrofitting older buildings, we're all aware of the problems with that, and of course air conditioning is a solution, but then there are the costs involved in that, not just for the environment, but also the financial costs initially, which are very high, but then for maintenance and for use. On a larger scale, urban heat islands can be reduced through the use of things like green roofs, planting more trees, and painting roads white, as is seen in the photo in the case of Los Angeles. With all of this in mind, what's really quite disappointing is that summer vulnerability isn't actually considered in most of the NECPs other than implicitly. So we do have references in many of them to district heating and cooling. So they add the word cooling, and that is sort of the main reference to cooling that there is in there. But really there are some mixed messages as well. In the case of Hungary, for example, they point out that energy used for cooling is currently only 0.1% of total use, and that this is expected to increase significantly. And then a little bit later they say, of course, the increases in energy efficiency are going to result in a drop in the need of energy for cooling. So contradictions even within the NECPs. One would imagine, of course, that it would be covered more in southern European countries where temperatures are likely to become higher for a prolonged period of times. Italy doesn't mention it at all. France, of course, has the Observatoire National de la Précarité Énergétique, but this actually doesn't include summer vulnerability so far, and one of their indicators is the sense of feeling cold rather than the sense of feeling too hot. We do have some good news though. The case of Spain, it is very prominently featured in the National Strategy for Energy Poverty, which is referred to, of course, in the NECP, and this could potentially be used as a source of inspiration for policymakers from other southern European countries. Next slide, please.
Yeah. So we also tried to see what is critically missing in the national energy and climate plans. And as already was said, the most obvious omission is that there is no assessment of the number of households or the type of households affected by energy poverty. There is a lack of definition of energy poverty. A lot of countries didn't put any mitigation targets or objectives. And also a lot of countries failed to make any policies or measures for tackling energy poverty explicit in their national NECPs. What comes as a bit less of a mistake, but still a mistake and omission, is that there is no further strategy plan. Like, for example, you plan some measures, but not to elaborate them more. It's a problem that very often countries, instead of defining all the actions in the NECP, they decide to define them in the future. So they will do strategies and measures later on. Sometimes it was a problem that they didn't mention how they will tackle energy poverty under Article 7 of the Energy Efficiency Directive. And it was several times said that renovation wave could be used as an opportunity to strengthen action against energy poverty. What we kind of missed is, although this was not in the instructions for the member states, was any reference to COVID-19. None of the NECPs is having any COVID-19 implications in there, although the pandemic actually already started when they were being formed. What we discovered is that relatively decent coverage from the ones reviewed more in detail are France, Spain, and to some extent Greece. Quickly, just a few recommendations. In 2024, there will be a revision of the NECPs where it's a big window of opportunity to strengthen the action against energy poverty in NECPs. It would be very important to address the summer energy poverty aspects, the cooling aspects, as we were discussing, but it would be also very important to have demand for a more holistic approach to tackling energy poverty. So instead of just short-term specific measures, it would be good if the member states are looking into more long-term scenarios, more measures that are intertwined with different policies, such as taxing policy, employment policy, housing, pension policy, health policy, and so on. It would also be important to take the long-term renovation strategies as an opportunity to strengthen energy poverty action, because these plans are supposed to tackle some, to include some measures to tackle energy poverty. So yeah, these are the few recommendations we would do to the European Commission if we had a chance or say. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Great insights. Really a lot of work there, putting the extra effort, let's say, to scan all the documents. I'm opening now the floor for comments and discussions. I would just like to bring only one idea here. It's what it seems, and I kind of highlighted that on my presentation as well, is the timing of the publishing of the NECPs. So from as I see it now and what happened in Portugal, we understood better and dig deeper on this problem on the national strategy that's now available, on the long-term renovation strategy. So for the future, I kind of see as we need a comprehensive review of all these plans together to see what is really missing. Because if we are looking only to the NECPs that was published like 1 year ago at least, so things have progressed. We are missing maybe something with only looking to one of the policies. So yes, questions for the group especially, and some thoughts. Thank you, Pedro. Go ahead.
Sorry, I just had 2 small questions. In the first slides, some countries like Finland, you say they didn't recognize energy poverty, but they defined it. So I was wondering what's the difference there? And also, I think some countries did not recognize the problem, did not define it, did not quantify it, but then had an integrated approach. So I found it interesting. If you can elaborate a little bit on that.
Yes, I can try to answer. Although I think the European Commission tried to standardize the way that national climate plans are presented, I think the way they are written and the way they are presented are quite different between all the countries. And you have like countries like Finland, taking the example of Finland, for instance, that they say that the problem is really the problem is really low in Finland, so they don't feel the need to address it by implementing measures to tackle it directly. So they are tackling through social policy measures already implemented. So they don't design it for tackling energy poverty. They already have a lot of measures like minimum wage or social benefits already in place, and they say that okay, we acknowledge this exists, is quite low here, so but it's not really a problem, and when it's a problem, we address it by through the policies that already implemented. But the approaches, for instance, Sweden doesn't even have a distinction between energy poverty and poverty, for instance. So it's quite different between all the countries.
May I add something in terms of recognition? What we also meant is that Finland recognizes energy poverty as a phenomenon, but not in Finland. And Finland is a very curious case among the NECPs because they do have prevention from disconnections and energy advice. So they kind of try to meet the targets. They kind of say they don't have it, but they have measured. It's a very, I think that Finland would be one of the most like curious cases among the NECPs, because there's a bit of inconsistency in the NECP. And there's a very large and interesting paper on that I think that Harriet contributed on it also, about how like all this knowledge of on energy poverty and the NECPs like are not consistent. And the thing about what João Pedro said, that there's a lot more done than what the NECPs actually managed to tell. And just a very short comment. There's another thing that also it's mentioned in this paper, and that we didn't have the time to put in the presentation, is that the NECPs avoid completely energy exclusion as a subject. And I think that that's important, because there's like a lot of energy exclusion among Eastern and Southern countries, that people that don't even have access to the grids, and that's not mentioned on the national plans.
Yes, another thing that I think it's worth mentioning, it's the fact that transports are not addressed. Transport poverty is not addressed at all, or it's very marginal in the sense that it's not recognized as being an issue in any of the national plans, as well as gender or ethnic minorities, as the paper from Stefan and Harriet and Marine also highlights.
Maybe just a quick comment, or actually rather a proposal, not really answering the question, is that seeing how differently the guidelines from the Commission were interpreted by the member states, and seeing how many omissions they did in constructing the NECPs, it would actually maybe be an interesting exercise by the ENGAGER to do policy recommendations for the European Commission for the 2024 revision of NECPs, because I think we would have quite some stuff to say about it. So not only a paper like Sergio is suggesting, but also some policy recommendations from this group would be in place.
Thank you. I have also a question or a thought on this. So it's around the intersection of all these strategies. So we have currently the NECPs, we have the roadmaps for 2050, which maybe not the one we should target now. We have the long-term renovation strategies of buildings, and we have the energy poverty mitigation strategies. And from the example I see in Portugal, what I can talk best, there is a bit of overlap. So we are now discussing the NECPs here, and we are seeing that people wanted to have more information on energy poverty. And my question is, was that the best place to do it? Because if we have the national strategy, the energy poverty strategies, that's where we should look deeper into that, because the NECPs cover a lot of things around decarbonization as well. So how do you see it? And it's a question for everybody, more or less. How do you see this integration and intersections between the policies? Should they overlap completely? Should we leave room for addressing in more detail energy poverty in the strategies? Or what's the problem of that? What we are missing?
I think this is a really interesting and complex issue, because I think we're talking about strategies that, if you want, at the same level, right, at the national level. So they should be complementary, but not inconsistent. For instance, in terms of for Portugal, for instance, the National Energy and Climate Plan refers to the upcoming strategy that it's already on public consultation now, but refers to it, but doesn't. But he mentioned some of the policies that are already being considered in the strategy right now, although it was not ready at the time. So I think that there should be consistency and should be they should be complementary, and it's really important in order to strengthen the policies and the measures that are that should be in place.
Yeah. Just a point there, but in Portugal that doesn't happen, but I think in some other locations the ministers responsible for each of the strategies are different. luckily in Portugal is everything under the environment, so with the Secretary of State of Energy and so on. But if you get energy poverty from a social perspective in one place, then from the energy side on the other one, and on an environment in other, can be a complex issue, what you are saying, Ricardo, which I fully agree. But this integration, it might be problematic in some locations. Yeah, Min?
Yeah, I agree that the social inequality that derive from as a consequence of energy poverty is currently tackling in other sector and other minister in the parliament rather than the energy and climate alone. So I think it could be rather than integrated in the plan. Maybe the strategic plan could be more of a high level of directive that require energy sector and climate to collaborate with other ministry relating to social housing, for example, urban planning, and those ministry that deal with the poverty general and social exclusion as general. So I think that's one interesting example from the UK. I think I read some paper about transport poverty, that in the UK have a social exclusion department, a thematic department that link between different sectors, but they are based on a thematic like social exclusion, either in energy, transport, or social housing, or different sectors. So maybe having certain agency that look at the social problems as a whole and connected to different roots of the problem, either from energy or from other sector, could be a way forward. I don't know if Portugal if it's feasible for the current governance in Portugal's setting. I don't know.
Adam?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're one of the, it's always a little bit upsetting when you raise the UK example, because of course there isn't an NECP for the UK currently. Hopefully there will be one perhaps in the future if the political situation changes. But you know, I've read your work on silo thinking and Min, and so I'm aware of that and the effects of not having this overlap. So I think having an overlap is really important. As João was saying, this should these be completely separate or not? I mean, again, looking at the case of Spain, they refer to the national strategy. If we look at the original question that you had set for us, which was referring to summer vulnerability, is it included in the NECP? It isn't actually included in the Spanish NECP. It simply refers to the other document where it is included. I don't think that that's necessarily problematic. I think it's understandable that the overlap might not be a total overlap, but nevertheless, from my perspective, it would still be better if that was included. I do think that it would be necessary to have it included in the NECP as well. And I think we do need to try and work to break down these silos as much as possible in policy making, because there are common goals where it just simply makes a lot more sense and will be a lot more efficient if policymakers are working together. Classic example is the one of yours, João, Pedro, the recent paper on positive energy districts and energy poverty, where the alignment is potentially quite strong.
Thank you, Adam. Ricardo? No?
Yeah,
okay.
Sorry. I like the fact that we keep referring to our articles and everyone's articles in here. So I think it's a good perspective. But I would just like to highlight the need also to question the fact that there isn't much national climate plans referring the fact that the subnational scale should be addressed also. And that's really important. I think Portugal does that, and some other like Austria and Belgium, for instance, but they are being dealt into different levels. and with different measures. But this is, I think this is even at a national strategy level document. I think it would be really useful for this scale to be addressed, because it should be recognized that energy poverty and decarbonization as well. So it has to be dealt at different scales, and as you brought up in the beginning of the discussion.
Thank you. Lydia?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that one angle to look at it is also, how to say, political willingness angle. And it's like, in principle, for example, in the case of Slovenia, in principle, I don't mind that we will at some point in the future, distant future, probably have a specific strategy on energy poverty separated from the NECP. It's just the problem that at the moment the country is using it as an excuse not to act. And I think if you look at the European picture, you will see that big part of the Eastern European countries, they simply don't want to deal with this issue. They want to kind of push it aside and put it under the carpet. So this is why I think it's important that it's a very clear demand from the European Commission that you put this in the NECP, that you elaborate the measures, that you make it as tangible and as detailed as possible. If there was political willingness to act, then I wouldn't have any preference of how it is done. But since big part of the European Union member states are not acting, yeah, there has to be some top-down regulation.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you. Catherine, maybe to wrap up this part.
Yeah, I was just curious because in the presentation you highlighted that many of the NECPs said that they'd kind of identified energy poverty and that they would deal with it later, like they would elaborate further plans in the future. And I just wondered what kind of justification they gave for that, or if indeed they did give a justification for that. Thank you.
May I? Sorry.
Yeah, I think both can answer, but please, I mean.
Yeah, I was about to say that I think that that's the thing about meeting the targets. Like a lot of countries said that they recognize the problem. They had like even some indicators to measure it, but they didn't have like a proper strategy developed. That's, for example, the case of Slovenia, but also the case of Portugal that was developing the strategy, and also the case of Italy that was developing the national observatory. I think that it has also to do with the fact that energy poverty is moving very fast, as João Pedro said, and then most of the countries are actually thinking about it and doing strategies, but they didn't have at the time of the NECPs. You can also see a lot of change between the drafts and the final NECPs in terms of energy poverty. So I think that now, like Italy or like Slovenia or like maybe Portugal, most of the countries are discussing or doing those strategies. So that's why this group, because there was like a large number of countries saying so. Greece, for instance, also there was like 6 or 7 countries saying so.
Thank you. I think we can wrap up this part of the session and move on to the final reflections. I'll be doing short insights on this regional perspective Ricardo was mentioning. I think it's like moving ahead, and then Anna, Horta will also talk about a bit of summary vulnerability and their perspective and final thoughts. So let me just share my screen. I have 2 slides here. So yeah, so I think we have seen during the week already that there is a lot of discussion still ongoing at the national level. So even we still have the problem of the metrics and the targeting at national level. So, but really when we are looking, and that's what just Ricardo was mentioning, so when we are looking to the objectives we need to accomplish, the targets that the strategies and plans are putting forward, we see that it seems that cities and regions have a really important role here for this activities and ongoing work trying to solve energy poverty, or at least to reduce it. So it seems like national level, there is the framing needed, there is the strategies, there is the funding maybe in some locations, and the regulations, but is in cities where, at least in my perspective, we need to move forward into a deeper analysis and mitigation. So I'd like also to highlight here the Energy Poverty Advisory Hub, so the next step of the Energy Poverty Observatory, where the main idea is really moving from the part of, let's say, observation and data and information there, but also trying to assist cities and municipalities with energy poverty mitigation projects. So we have an extensive network of agents from research institutions, from local energy agencies, from NGOs and so on, that are spread across Europe on the main consortium and then on the antennas, which have the main goal in the next 4 years to do, I would say, five things. So really, first, of course, capitalize and build on the activities of the Energy Poverty Observatory, the EPOV. Then we have an interesting component of the research and the focus on cities, on the research-oriented approach, trying to apply the findings from exactly what we were discussing now. So there is a lot of research ongoing that is not translated really into our plans, national level plans and strategies that we need to understand how to bring that forward at the political level as well, and also for the city level measures. Then we want also to explore additional metrics and recommendations for energy poverty assessment, trying to target the city level and local scale. So in close collaboration with the Covenant of Mayors, trying to the third pillar of the Covenant of Mayors. So besides mitigation and adaptation, of course, now it's energy poverty. We want to join forces with the Covenant of Mayors to get this clear idea of what can be done at the city level. Also, we'll have a decentralized direct support focusing on local anchoring. So we'll support throughout the years 70 projects in municipalities and cities. So stay tuned for that. And there will be a link with experts on energy poverty in Europe and the municipalities. We'll also need to dig deeper and to continue to explore maybe, of course, the work of colleagues from ENGAGER and other initiatives, providing learning materials and good examples for inspiration at the city level. And then we'll now start structuring the support component with various levels of involvement and engagement, trying to connect and bring to this discussion also more and more the cities and the municipalities. So looking ahead and having this integrated approach in mind, I would say that what we have done so far, and we are still missing in some locations at the national level, we need to promote that perspectives at the local level. So trying to assess if there is the need for some specific definitions, maybe not, but more clearly on the measuring and monitoring, what tools can be used, what data is available at the regional level, which is not, maybe it's new data sets can be used for regional that's not available for national, or the opposite. Because what we know, what we see also in the EPOV is that there is national indicators, but then if we want to move to regional assessments, it's impossible to make that link. Then the part of course, targeting and policies addressing local level. So it's a matter, and I have that on the right in blue, it's a matter of understanding, and that's the next steps I think we have to do in research and practice at this field, is really the full integration of viable metrics that allow the characterization and monitoring of energy poverty at multiple scales. And then really a gap I've seen also in our national strategy, which is difficult to do, is the link of the indicators we use to characterize the problem, then the measures we want to do, and then to see if we can accomplish that. Because if we are using wrong indicators, or if we don't have the available data to make the monitoring, then we are just putting like targets in the bit of vacuum, because we are using maybe strange indicators to have this deeper assessment. And that's it from my side here. Anna?
Thank you. Well, I have a short reflection to share with you. Well, I think we are in a critical moment right now. We are in a moment when we are realizing that we are facing climate change, and climate change will be likely more serious than expected some years ago. And we are also in a moment where we are trying to engage with energy transition towards a more sustainable system, energy system. But in spite of all the effort and all the knowledge that has been produced about renewable energies and more sustainable technologies, and also climate change, etc., in spite of all the knowledge and all the effort of so many organizations, and including organizations in the area of energy poverty, I am afraid we risk going in the wrong direction. I am afraid we risk going in a direction where we will need more and more energy consumption as an answer to our needs. If you most of you attended my talk earlier, and I was well, I told you about that view of thermal comfort from a sociological analysis, where individuals and communities and societies can adapt to different types of weather, different types of climate, and that adaptation can be very sustainable in the sense that does not use many resources, etc. But the evolution we have been watching is in the sense of our societies, more and more societies around the world use more resources, natural resources, etc. And when we discuss climate change, and when we become aware of the impacts of climate change, and in a country like Portugal, where one of those impacts will be more frequent and more intense heat waves, for example, as well as droughts, etc. One of the responses, a natural response, a normal response, will be to protect ourselves from and to adapt ourselves to that different climate, that more harsh climate in the summer. And if at the same time we realize that in a country like this, we have a very important problem of energy poverty, it is normal to expect from governments, from different organizations and individuals, households, to take action in order to adapt to a future climate, a future that is already happening, a climate where we have more heat waves, etc. But that leads us to, in most cases, what I have seen, the signs I see is that adaptation, the actions we are taking to adapt to that climate rely mostly on technological solutions, but solutions that imply more energy consumption. That is the case of air conditioning, for example, instead of more passive measures where well, the energy consumption is reduced to a minimum. So, and as I was saying earlier this morning, so that societies can adapt very quickly, considering different arrangements of conditions, material conditions, understandings about what is happening, future weather projections, etc. So, and as we saw in the case of the United States, in a very short period, in a period of several decades, and a technology like the air conditioning systems can become normal and not just normal and expected to exist in every household, but also can create a lock-in situation where the building characteristics have become adapted to that situation where households are expected to have air conditioning. And in that situation, the quality of the building is lower than it would have been if there was not the expectation of installing air conditioning in those buildings. So I am very afraid of this risk we are running of becoming more and more unsustainable in spite of all the awareness of the need to have a transition to sustainability. And this risk is not only an environmental risk, we also run the risk of increasing social inequities in spite of all our collective efforts towards fighting energy poverty. So I think this is a very challenging time, and I wish all the answers and all the responses to these challenges were very encompassing considering these challenges, but I am really worried about this. But I am hopeful that training courses like this can have a positive role, because I have seen so many interesting discussions here. So maybe I'm just a very pessimistic person.
Thank you, Anna, for your insights and final remarks. So that's a wrap for the day. I hope you enjoyed the discussions and the presentations. Tomorrow you have our colleagues from Spain dealing with a slightly different topic. So Raul and Sergio will come back tomorrow with more on the final day of our training school, ENGAGER training school. Thank you. Stay safe. Bye.